Hello, my beautiful people. Welcome to another talk, and this is going to be a walk through the Zodiac with the Tarot. As many of you can see, I've got Richard Swatton here with me. So today is the 20th of October, currently around 1:30 in the afternoon. A bit of a grey Sunday here.
Same here. And we've both got colds. So
yeah. So today we are talking about the death card in the tarot. We'll also be exploring Scorpio as a sign, how the two kind of cross over, where the meeting point is, and really kind of opening up a dialogue on all of those things. For those of you that haven't seen Richard before, he's an amazing lecturer and astrologer. He was actually one of my tutors at the London School of Astrology, has a very broad and deep knowledge of the subject, among many others. So Richard, please, if you would introduce yourself.
Yes, well, you've said it all really. I'm a psychotherapist, been a psychotherapist since '94, and I will call myself a depth psychotherapist. And by that, I mean looking at the unconscious dimensions of a person's motivations and problems. That doesn't mean to say that everybody I see has to go into a full-length 7-year depth psychoanalysis. As a professional, I see different things in my practice. Some people come and go in 12 weeks. Some people are still with me after 8 years because they're exploring their psyche in depth. But that's my preference. I'm also an astrologer. And for a while, anyway, in my spiritual development, I passed through a phase of working with the Western mystery tradition, and then I went on to meditation and certain content. And now I'm interested in certain contemplative traditions in my own practice. So both a psychotherapeutic practice and a kind of an accompanying spiritual element too, by which I mean to say working for an ultimate stage of realization. I don't think we ever completely reach it, but well, maybe we do. Some people do, but nevertheless, that's a kind of path that I'm on. Now, I've been doing astrology since the age of 16, and since I'm now 58, I can't calculate because I've got a cold, but it's a hell of a long time.
Okay, awesome. Wow. So yes, Richard is super knowledgeable. We actually did a talk before, which is called Astrology versus Tarot. Really great talk. I had a lot of fun doing it. And it went into some of the stuff that I think people kind of don't see behind what we do. Behind tarot, behind astrology, there is obviously a lot of research. There's immersing yourself in the language, the symbology, which is a really important part of what we do. We are on the precipice of Scorpio season,
yes.
And it's a brilliant place for us to start to talk about the death card in tarot, to talk about Scorpio as a sign, and their rulerships as well, which I think is going to be really important. Again, Richard's going to delve into the symbology of this, and we're going to kind of unpick and unpack some of it, which I'm really excited about. One of the things that we were musing on before is this idea. And obviously, you know, it's been a big part of the human evolution to keep ourselves alive, to keep us living longer, to keep us, you know, growing and expanding, and to stop us dying out as a species, right? However, I personally feel like we might have gone a bit too far with it, and we've kind of turned death into this monstrous thing that that seems, you know, hard and cold and unnatural. And you know, interestingly enough, recently I was re-listening to a talk, as we said, by Alan Watts, and in there he said, you know, although birth is painful for both mother and child, it's you know, almost like a traumatic process. There's nothing unnatural about it. Our lives eventually, you know, hopefully later rather than sooner, come to an end, and there is, you know, that's what ties us into the natural world, I believe, anyway. It's what gives us this connection to nature, to the natural world, and it also it makes it worth living. You know, if it kind of just went on, I don't think human beings would do much. I don't think we would push to strive as much as we do. But yes, to kind of demystify that process and to talk about it. And what better time to do it in Scorpio than Scorpio season. We're just coming up to the 31st of October, or Samhain as it's known in the old traditions.
What was that word?
Samhain. So,
I haven't heard of that.
or some people call it Samhain, but yeah, it's all the same. But one of the things I find really interesting as well is it was considered the end of the year. Yule actually the beginning of the year, so you know, Halloween or Samhain was actually known as the end of the year. So really interesting the way that it plays off of that.
Yes, well, it's interesting that October, Oct, of course, is 8.
Yes.
And since the Julian calendar, which I think shifted things a bit, or we've decided that the beginning of the year really is you see, the 8 is counted from Aries or from you see, whereas we add two, so the 10th month is October officially according to the year, but actually in traditional terms and in symbolic terms, that number 8 linked with Scorpio and death is really why Scorpio is in it. It contains the natural month of the year. You see, and there's a difference between the natural month and the worked out civilized month of Western societies. Do you see? So I mean, the sun enters Scorpio in the next couple of days, and as I want to say sometimes about Scorpio, somebody has to represent the process of decay. It's not a very pleasant thing to talk about, but nevertheless, decay is as much part of the survival cycle as is new life.
Absolutely.
And when the leaves fall off the trees and we enter the season of autumnal gold and beautiful season in many ways, what happens is that the leaves, they decay, they turn into mulch, and they turn into food for the tree during the process of winter. It's a preparation for that.
Yeah.
That process of slow decay, or a recognition of death in the face of life, is behind the sign of Scorpio. Liz Green has talked, when the sun is in Scorpio, when the sun is in the 8th house, I mean, often she talks about the dragon fight. You know, and in mythology, especially in Freudian psychology, they talk about the 2 basic instincts. The Jungians don't kind of like this, but I do. That there's an instinct, Freud reckoned, of death, and an instinct for life. One is called eros, which is more than a cherub that strikes you, and you know, she strikes you with a thing and you fall in love. Eros, it meant just the whole of life. You know, life, the sun, the eros, it meant relating with everything. You come into a material body, or spirit does, and then you're subject to all of this. So it's a drive towards life, or the enhancement of libido. Whereas Thanatos, which is the god of death, and he has a brother called Hypnos, which of course is just a kind of, you know, behind hypnosis, you just kind of go into a trance state, a kind of living death. Which is to do with enlightenment. You know, Gurdjieff said that we're all asleep, and one of the things is we have to wake us up. So whether you see Hypnos or Thanatos is the god of actual death, or the drive to which we are moving towards. There's a drive in us to destroy the very fabric of our material existence. Yeah, and that is represented by Scorpio. So Liz Green calls it the dragon fight because it's St. George and the dragon. It's the sun, which is St. George, the hero, you know, battling over the god of death and decay. But as you said, the whole process of death and transformation has been given a bad press. We've turned it into a horror. I think one of the Christian traditions really turned death into hell. It's a vehicle of punishment, and it's something that we must make up for in our life. Actually, hell comes from the word, in the St. James Bible, they use the word Hades, taken over from the Greek. But I'm just saying that the death that we're talking about is an inevitability. It's as much part of the life cycle. If nothing dies, then nothing can be reborn.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's why it rules over the elimination system, Pluto and Scorpio. You know, in physical terms, we have to get rid of waste material. And Pluto transits at core are about getting rid of what is unnecessary to the evolution of either your individual's life or the collective. So although we don't like getting rid of things, belief systems, the way we've been, old behaviors that are ingrained, the way we view things, or even our location where we are. Pluto transits often bring a kind of inevitability to an end. So Sun in Scorpio have all of this mythic theme inside of them, and they're particularly attuned to what is going to cause them or fear a kind of lack of survival. So these people are attuned at a very instinctual level towards that process of life, those things which could destroy. Now, depending on how they deal with it, depends on their character. Some people hate it and then pit themselves up against life as if nothing's going to, you know, there is a stubborn fixed sign, right? Nothing's going to take me down.
Yeah.
I'm going to become the best that I can. And I'm not going to let anybody in, not really. So there's a fear of intimacy often, a desire for intimacy. But when you fuse with another, whether it's through sex or whether it's through deep emotional involvement, you lose part of your individuality.
Yeah, it's a form of...
You see, and that's a fear of letting go. So Scorpio is an inherent paradox. It wants the depth, but the depth means the loss of various identities through our progressions and our development, but they fear the loss as well. So they got a bad time. There's a bad press for them, but inevitably they're trying to bring light to the darkness of life. And whether that's an interest in occult or psychotherapy or a spiritual interest, one way or another, that inherent pattern lies with as the sun moves into Scorpio.
Yeah, no, I think as well, it kind of, that really highlights, when you say it that way, for me anyway, it really highlights the whole phoenix aspect of Scorpio, you know, where they transcend whatever perceived darkness, you know, is experienced or had or held, and turn it into something else. It's interesting you mention as well about the to join with another, to merge with another. You do. It's the same with you know, with relationships. In order to be with somebody else, something about your inherent nature has to give way. You know, you because otherwise it doesn't work, right? That's the whole.
Yeah.
It reminds me of, and I remember reading this in Elizabethan times. Sex was called dying, and how the French used the word le petit mort, like the little death, for orgasm and stuff. Which, and again, you know, very sort of Scorpio type themes as well, in terms of like the taboos and stuff. But it's very true, and I think one of the things that people kind of forget about those things, especially when you merge or, you know, interact with somebody else, is there is a level of your psyche that goes through a small death, so to speak, because you can't remain as you are. You have to change. And, you know, hopefully if it's going the way that it should and it resonates at the right level, you transcend the self that you were in order to become a better person, and you and your partner are then more enriched for it. Yeah, they're very, very interesting. And
well, at its own play, on its own plane of a kind of physical, emotional absorption in the experience, not with one another, but there's an experience that is shared, and temporarily the ego is dissolved, the ego, the identity, because there's a kind of sensate, a physical pleasure, which hopefully engulfs the whole body. I mean, we could talk about Wilhelm Reich's, who was a great psychotherapist stemming from Freud, talked about the total orgasm, right? You know, almost a Kundalini experience in which what he was trying to do was integrate all of the parts of the body There's the head, which tends to be separated from the neck, and the chest, which tends to be separated from the power centers and the sexual centers, and then the lower part seems to be. So his interest was integrating the whole lot in order to achieve, and he believed a lot in the sexual experience as an attempt to integrate everything, and sometimes people don't. They don't let fully go. I'm not saying I'm the master of tantra. It takes a long while to reveal yourself, which again is to do with Pluto. It's to do with the card of death. It's about you're going to be revealed to some mystery beyond yourself, and if you can experience that in sexual, you are healed. But it's only at the emotional level. It's not a transformation of consciousness which lasts, which is why people are drawn time and time again to good sexual experiences. Whether they have those with attempt that with drugs or not, there's another facet we could explore. But that's it's a false path, because the sensate experience is so powerful. You're drawn back into trying that again and again and again, and it doesn't actually transform anything. It keeps you hooked on the same experience. So we have to take the symbolic element of that sexual experience and say that it can be healing on a physical and emotional level, but at the same time, it is a representation of a higher order of transformation.
Absolutely. I think some really, really awesome things that you touched on there. Is the part about Wilhelm Reich wanting to integrate this whole experience.
Yeah.
That point, or the body orgasm, is a point at which the ego is completely dissolved, right? This idea of me, myself, and just that as separate to everything else, it kind of disappears. It has to. And so again, we're looking at that kind of.
But that's frightening.
It can be
frightening because
especially if they're at a level where they're not ready for the experience, which is, like you said, where the whole thing with people using drugs and stuff. I think it really holds back because it's not a pure experience. It's not coming from a place of preparation, so to speak. And interestingly enough, a lot of the mystery traditions utilize that, and they worked and trained for it for a long time to utilize sexual energy in such a way, in a way that it was actually transcendental and actually something that was in life.
That is a path in life. It's to do with Kundalini yoga and uses the energetic experience, if you like, to lead to a transformation of consciousness. That's specific. Excuse me. That's a specific path in life. I mean, it's tricky because most of us would just want to engage the pleasurable experience of merging and then go at it again as soon as possible. But they don't. They're trying to transform the very energies, and it's again this symbol of the phoenix is interesting. It's an Egyptian symbol. It represents, however, the transformation over the end of a cycle, and it's a willing sacrifice of the bird. It's yet another. It's a kind of god that sacrifices. It's the end of a yuga or an aeon, and it goes willingly into the fire. Transformation by fire is an ultimate transformation of form.
Yeah, it's true purification.
Absolutely. There's no going back after a transformation of fire. Yeah. I've often liked the outer planets, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. There's various types of transformations, but the images are different. Neptune soaks you to death, so that you're merged with everything. Uranus breaks you apart in little pieces, hopefully to put you back together. So it's a kind of bang, and you feel all separate, dissociated and so on. But Pluto ultimately transforms the material substance. There's no going back after Pluto. Yes. It's the ultimate in purification and the destruction of the form. And then it turns into smoke of some kind, and that rises to heaven and so on. So there are different transformational processes. inherent, at least in the symbology. Whereas in the card of death, you just get that one symbol. So what we're trying to do here is associate the tarot with astrology and how they can dialogue, if you like. So,
Yeah.
but knowing the archetypal background, the connections, the images, the things to do with that word, the 13th card of the Zodiac, 13, the
Yeah.
witch's circle, the witch's coven is 13, the 13 months of the year to do with the moon. It's all very to do, I think, with the mysteries of the physical, because Scorpio is opposite Taurus. It's the end of form. What happens after form itself is destroyed? So I think these are, it's more pagan than anything else. It's the mysteries of the moon, the last cycle of the moon. All of that kind of stuff comes into Scorpio.
Yeah, for sure. I think one of the things that I love about the tarot aspect is when you look at the death card, and it's got a very bad rap, because when people see it, it kind of, maybe pokes something primordial in them. Which is interesting as well, given that Scorpio rules the 8th house, and this card, the death card, which I'm sure
Yes,
many are familiar with, has
that's the weight deck, isn't it?
Yes,
and that's interesting because he rides a horse.
Yeah, I mean, again, that in itself kind of speaks volumes about many things. One thing that I wanted to go back on slightly, you talked about the death of form, and it's really interesting that it is the 13th card. 1 and 3 give you 4. 4 in the tarot is the Emperor, which represents the sign of Aries. In classical astrology, both of those signs were ruled by Mars, which again is an interesting interplay. But one of the other things that I kind of like about that, so you've got the death card representing the transformation or the culmination of the physical life, and then on the opposite end of it, with its number 4, the Emperor, is where the Zodiac begins, right? It represents the birth, how we come into the world, how we are presented, so to speak, and it's very much about the beginning of life. So you get this kind of whole, just in 2 cards, you get this whole kind of idea of balance and 2 halves of a whole, so to speak. Even though they're different modes, different elements in terms of their astrology, they still have that link. And the Emperor would be the outward self, and the death card would be, the inward self, that again, like you were talking about, the inner transformation. So some really interesting stuff takes place there.
Are you drawing a distinction between things that change on an outer material level, like we can gain power and structure, or we move house, or we change cars, or we finished a college course or a relationship? Those are actual kind of deaths in a way, on an outer level. Are you drawing a distinction between the Emperor and the 13th card?
Yes. And the reason being is, when you simplify in numerology, the 13 would give you 4. Which is a nod to the Emperor. I've always found it very interesting that, and you can do that with all of the major arcana cards. They all, once you look at them numerologically, they give you a hint at their opposite card, and they are sort of paired in that respect. One thing that you touched on earlier,
that's interesting,
which I found was pretty amazing, is the idea of the skeleton and Saturn. And when we die, obviously your flesh kind of decays, but your skeleton survives for years. And of course, what rules your skeleton is Saturn. So I'd really like you to take us into that.
Well, in traditional astrology, up to the 17th, 18th, 19th century, we didn't have the outer planets. And that's representative of that there was only 7 planets, and that we didn't have access generally to understanding things on a more metaphysical or transcendent level. Now, that's not totally true, because people like Plato, Plotinus, Christ, Buddha, other key figures, maybe even Dr. John Dee, I don't know, but other figures have in philosophy and religious, the religious schools, and shamanism particularly is I think the basis of most religions, because that's the oldest form of experience of transcendent reality. Taoism doesn't go back that far. Shintoism may do. Hinduism doesn't. But there's a gods and goddesses of change and transformation. Shamanism is the root at it. But in general, when the outer planets come into being astrologically, we have more and more access to steps beyond the ego. So Saturn has always represented the end of the line, the end of form, because Saturn is the ultimate in incarnation. You know, in alchemy, it's lead. It's the basest, solid, most material form of existence. I mean, in astrology, if you alchemy just sees life is divided into a spectrum. There's sun, gold, silver, tin, or copper, and these are all represented by the 7 planets. So they're material. They're different forms of life enacting. Rather like the sun is a spectrum, you know, in different colors. So Saturn represented the end of the line, and so in traditional astrology, it represented death, the end of something, the end of form, or for that matter, the most densest form.
That's where it gets
spirituality. So in materiality, it can clearly die. Materiality, when we come here, for some reason, maybe an alchemical reason, we have full access to all of the levels of consciousness, including the material. Now, what we do with the material, because it dies and it decays, it's not subject, if you like, to the ideas of greater transcendence. This is partly resolved in how do we deal with the problem of matter. Let's call it evil. Let's call it, you know, even Sri Ramana Maharshi, the Advaita tradition, said we must be able to leave the body. The body must be sidelined. In alchemy, it's a bit of a contradiction. In Christianity, the body transcends. After Christ's death, it transcends in a different form. So there's a deep mystery in Christianity about the value of the body. Institutionalized Christianity is a different thing altogether. I mean, the Buddhists, you know, when a person dies, they take them out to the top of a hill and let the vultures get at them. I mean, because they you know, even that life can be transformed into birds, you know, with birds, and birds are spiritual forces. I'm wandering off.
No, I love it, and it really is a perfect thing. And I think this going back to this idea of you know, turning death into this monster, and you know, like this whole idea in the West, we embalm bodies and paint them to make them look like they're still alive.
Oh yes, because I mean, cryogenics, which is the you know, in the States, I mean, it used to, in the 1970s, it would cost you 150,000 or something. God knows what it is now.
Yeah.
You know, Timothy Leary had his head chopped off and put into some kind of helium-filled stuff just in case it could bring us back. This is all a very scientific view. I mean, can you imagine if they actually did it in 300 years? A person born in the 20th century, you know, I mean, going to come out in the 20th. How would they adapt? They wouldn't have the... Anyway.
I think what I really like about you know, you bringing that up is, and I think people actually need to consider these things. This whole idea of our bodies decaying and going back to the earth, for me, ties you into the idea of immortality. You know, if your body is being eaten by other species of earth that are going to go on to become other things and then feed that cycle, it ties you into the cycle of the earth. Yes. Whereas this idea of embalming yourself and being buried in a casket and stuff, it actually cuts you off. And yeah, all right, fair enough. Your soul, I believe that your soul doesn't stay in your body. But for your body to go back to the earth, which it's formed from, is an important part of the process and the cycle. I really believe that.
Yes. Well, in the Egyptian traditions, they used to think that the immortality of the body was important, so that the soul could reincarnate as the Ba or Ka. You see, so they have their various, but that's a very sun-oriented religion. Ra or Ta, the power. Ta was the power behind the sun. The sun was Ra, and so it was a kind of worship of the life force. Predated Christianity by a couple of thousand years. You know, the sun worship, but what it devalues is the material, the Great Mother. It devalues the whole cyclic system of death and rebirth, and it devalues the feminine. That it has its part to play, and that we are a material body. Now, whether we like it or not, there is an initiation experience, of which Pluto and Scorpio represent. An initiation through the gradual mortification of our own body, the gradual decay of the leaves. And we're the leaves on trees, you know, we're human beings, you know, what do we leave? 70 and a bit more now. You know, we're not even a drop on the ocean of eternity. Not really. Not in terms of history and so on. The spirit is a different thing. The psyche is a different thing. The psyche is our experience in many ways. So if there's an immortal soul, maybe there is, maybe there isn't. But the psyche tends to act like there is one. Religions create belief systems to show you where it goes or what happens. And these are all imaginative ideas about what happens after death. They're very, very interesting. And they are attempts by the mind and the psyche to resolve the anxiety of death. But if we could go right back into the symbol of Pluto, which is the archetypal god of death, she, in older mythologies, in Greek mythology anyway, it predates Pluto and Hades into the goddess Ananke. I don't know whether you know this goddess. She used to, but it's interesting, and Ereshkigal. And these are goddesses predating the masculization of forces. You know, the Greeks, you know, loved the male first. You know, so
very solar.
Yeah, so that's why they have these perfect kind of statues of the male. You know. Perfect form, perfect ideal, very sexual, very attractive, very, you know, unique, and idealized statues of the male. But before that, the female deities were in operation, and Ananke was the goddess of necessity.
Okay.
And what necessity was, to realize her in our life, which is often the basis of a Pluto transit, is to realize there are certain things that we don't have control over.
Yeah.
Death being one of them. Of course, death is simply a larger force that is necessary for the evolution of the Earth or the evolution of the cosmos, and that all things die, including our sun. In 56 billion years' time, the sun will no longer exist. That's been worked out by science. There's an inevitable end. And that was imagined as necessity. And we don't like her because in our consciousness, you know, today we like to think we've got control over everything. Cryogenics, you know, soon we'll have immortals and so on, and we'll be able to live beyond our time. Ananke is the necessity of evolution to do what it must, to do whatever it takes to evolve consciousness, evolve the universe, evolve the solar system. And you can see this in Anki, is we must go along with what we have to do. And there's an experience that we have to experience in order to feel complete. And that is the experience of a death of form. So we will have to consciously, or unconsciously, of course, go through it in one way or another. And even if we manage to prolong life, I doubt very much whether the life that's so prolonged will want to live very long. I mean, there are great Tibetan lamas that have lived 120, 140 years, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, I saw one online who was 106 and still doing his is not his karate, but his martial arts. I
Yeah.
mean, he's an amazing fellow. Had a voice that was so sonorous. You know, he could. You know what I mean? He was still. You can always tell somebody when the voice is kind of weak, the energy is going. I mean, still sonorous, still moving about. It's not just to do with diet. I think it's to do with a certain kind of attitude. But
Absolutely.
there are always these exceptions. But necessity is the capacity to accept that there are larger cycles of evolution going on. Call them yugas, call them aeons, and that these are enacting within us as individuals. Individuality is negligible compared to these larger cycles. And there's a disinclination with the control of science and all that. If we can only understand things, we can become immortal. We only become immortal when we're dead. That's interesting. We become immortal as a spirit in life, but not when we're actually embodied. So I think this whole thing you talk about, initiation through Scorpio, initiation through realizing that we have a limited time within the material body, and that is in itself, in all religions, death is at the center. We must contemplate it in order to become awake.
Absolutely. That's such a beautiful point that you make as well. And I think this is the problem as well nowadays when, if you say that to somebody, it's, oh, don't be so morbid. And it's like, but it's a part of the life that we live, and the life that is eventually going to come to its natural end. Again, to go back to this idea of the Emperor and Aries and the Death card as well, birth and death. They're two halves of exactly the same thing. You have one life, right? In terms of your physical self, I believe you have one life. But on either end of that, so like two bookends, so to speak, you have your birth and you have your death. They're both natural phenomena of coming to the earth school, so to speak. What I really like about what you said is it really is something that is worth contemplating. It is, and I think I read this as well, that it's too monstrous to think that death has no meaning, that's it, that after we die, that's it, it just ends. And I think that is a big part of what really scares people. It's what stops them thinking about it and talking about it. And interestingly enough, even for atheists who, they don't believe in God, they don't believe in it, and the fear and the anxiety that is conjured up in them when you talk about the event of death comes from a very real place. And it's because, in my personal opinion, some part of them knows that this is not it. Even the skeleton that's left behind, right? Your flesh, days, weeks, right? It just kind of goes. Your skeleton and the fact that it's left behind, it's got that Saturnian element to it because it rules Saturn, hints at that idea that some part of you will continue to live on. If your bones can survive that long, then the part of you that is pure essence is eternal, right? It will continue to thrive and to grow. Again, but really, really interesting stuff. And this whole idea about controlling it. I mean, when you look at Scorpio and the 8th house, and people talk about power dynamics and who has the control and who doesn't have the control, and you see a lot of modern astrologers will talk about that stuff. It's just really
I just must say, all of the so-called transpersonal signs, also known as the collective signs, are from Libra through to Pisces, and they all represent a confrontation of the individual ego with the other side of things. So death starts in Libra. It's a different kind of death. We see death of form in Scorpio, but in Libra calls you to realize that there are other people in the world. There are other individuals with whom you can relate. And if you don't do that, you're just on your own. The first 6 signs are to do with individual development, you see. And that's not wrong. They're trying to clearly differentiate what the individual is. But from Libra, there's the death of Aries.
Yes.
Aries is a representation of the existence of a singular individual, a cell in the whole. and the right to exist. I exist, says Libra. It doesn't have a form yet. It hasn't moved into Taurus, but it has a power, and so it's always interested in instant things. You know, it's boring. You know, things are boring. You know, the new, the fresh. You know, it's very Aries, very, very spring. But it's interesting. All the spring gods like Adonis and all that, they die early. Because they only represent that anyway, the instantaneousness. So I don't want to go all the way through them. You can check them out. They're individual components of the development of a seed, a bird, an individual sun, whatever it is. Libra, the sun goes down. It's the sunset. It's the sunset of the dawn, which means there is another side. So this other side, we begin death in Libra. And it's interesting, the sign of Libra used to be in the constellation of Scorpio.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Now, you see, it's only about 2,000 years old, is Libra. Because it's the southern claw. But it just used to go Virgo into Scorpio. And they differentiated it when human justice and civilization, and instead of just being an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, you know, that kind of law of right and wrong,
reason,
there was this kind of sign of justice coming, is that we could perhaps judge people on different levels. It's a very intellectual, idealistic sign, but it still represents that there is a transpersonal law going on, and the individual is subject to it. So if you want to relate, so Scorpio is you know, Sagittarius is the death of what we know as an individual, which is a Gemini. Do you see? We have a personal home in Cancer, but we have an outer home or a profession that we're seeing in the collective. Capricorn represents what our profession are set up in the material world as an individual, rather than belonging to a family group in Cancer. We belong to a position, a status. Or Aquarius is the same, opposite Leo. Leo is the sign of the individual creativity, and Aquarius is the sign which represents the creative, the whole of creativity of mankind. How do you deal with that? You know, in an individual, it's a problem. So
it has its moments, I can assure you.
You know, it's like I in order to fulfill myself as an individual, I need to know everything. So that's the problem with the sun in Aquarius. You see, sun is individual, and Aquarius is a collective. Is a collective sign, and the same for Pisces. You synthesize everything in Virgo, but then ultimately it melts away into the sea of oblivion, or the total mass, if you like, of the whole collective existence, which is Pisces. So all of the signs represent death, but Scorpio is a special one. It represents the death of form, and in one way or another, we have to experience that. And there's an initiation into that. And interestingly enough, in astrological sense, I know I'm going on, but
no, it's
Sagittarius comes after it. Sagittarius, therefore, is the hope of something beyond death, and astrology tells us that. That's why it's called the sign of religion, or you know, an attempt to move beyond death. And so all the signs are a representation of a sequence of experiences.
Absolutely.
And therein lies heaven, religion, metaphysics, all of those things, you know, journeys of exploration, mental knowledge, meditations, priests, all of that, something beyond us. Sagittarius's arrow goes up into the heaven, but unfortunately it always comes down to the earth eventually.
It will have to come back down at some point.
And I would say that number 4 is the number of materiality. It's the 4 elements. It consolidates. So there is something connected to this emperor, and I don't know the symbology of the tarot that well, but I love unfolding on Scorpio at the moment, and Pluto. Pluto is the end of a cycle. It's the transformational cycle. It's the food that's been intaken. It's all of its nutrients has been done, and then it moves into the lower colon and then into the colon. And the word colon, do you know what it means? the canal of the dead.
Oh wow,
See,
that's
so
pretty.
even physiologically, we have this idea that there is a process of death and decay, and it needs eliminating. And when we have a Pluto transit, something in it has come to an end. And if we don't get rid of it, we will die of its fumes, of its toxins. And anybody watching, and I've had this, constipation many, many years ago, couldn't get rid of it. It's the most horrific thing because you poison yourself.
From the inside out, yeah.
And this is where we come back to this idea of fearing death. I'm sure everybody fears it. I mean, I'm not exactly exalted by the prospect, but all religions say that there's an initiation into that phase of life.
Yes.
Hecate, who rules over the dark moon, she's interested in that.
Very much so.
You know, and it's interesting that we shove death into these feminine deities, you know, and again, there's this conspiracy of mythology to put it all at the fault of the material world, what we're experiencing. But I think this idea of the end of a cycle, the getting rid of something, including ourselves, is necessary for the evolution of things that come after us, and that we've played our part, and we may evolve. We may not, depending on the level of consciousness that we've reached. We might go into the Bardo rounds, and as the Tibetan Book of the Living and Dying says, we pop there, and then some forces or energies decide whether we've reached a stage where we can go forward, or reach a stage where we have to come back as a rat or something.
Yeah, those are really interesting concepts. This idea of initiation is one that I wanted to touch back on as well, and I really like the way that you put that forward. And just to backtrack ever so slightly, this whole thing about Libra being, you know, where death really starts, and it being, you know, the transpersonal and the realm of the other,
which means literally across from the personal. There is a sunrise in which everything comes into being, and there's a sunset in which the sun is about to meet the dark forces of life.
Yeah, absolutely. Which it gives. It really made me think of a line in a film. It's about a vampire, actually, so perfect for the season.
Yeah.
He actually says, you know, one of the hardest things that you'll ever learn as an immortal. So we touched on this as well. Is learning to deal with the cold, dark wasteland of eternity. And that really struck a chord with me, because I was like, wow, okay, so, you know, forget the fact that it's a film. What's it called? Suspension of disbelief.
Okay.
Let's think about that and unpick it. If you were immortal, that is something very real that you would face. And, you know, there's this girl, she's, you know, like completely besotted with him. And she says, you know, I love you, I want to be with you. And he says, but you're beautiful to me because you're human. Your short years are what give your life meaning.
Yeah.
And that really hit home with me. Like, even now, I just got a shiver up my spine as I said that, because it makes a lot of sense. You know, it gives that validation to the experience that we have. And I think one of the things that I'm loving about this talk is that it's open and it's frank and it's honest. And I think it's important for us to be accepting of this as an event that is going to accompany us all. I myself, I mean, when I was younger, there were times where I really thought about death a lot. And I wasn't afraid of the fact that I was going to die, because I knew that that was something that happened to everybody. What really, really, excuse my language, but fucking frightened me a lot was this idea of, I don't know how it's going to happen or when, you know, like, is it going to be sudden? Is it going to be painful? Is it going to be long? That was the thing. And I think that's what we collectively struggle with. It's not so much the fact that we're going to die. I think, you know, we've all accepted that on some level. It's just the not knowing how it will happen that really freaks us out. But to bring it back to this,
can I pick up on that?
Yeah, please.
Because isn't that the whole point? Isn't that you know, we'll talk about when you go through a Pluto transit, let's say of the sun or moon or ascent, whatever, or when a death card comes up in a reading, something is passing out of life.
Yes.
And whether we accept it, we can make it more easy, more graceful. I don't think we haven't got a lot of grace about death. We just see it as the enemy. I completely agree with you. I think we're not allowed to talk about it, or this embalming, and if ever you've seen what was that to come out of America show that I often talk about.
There was
Alan Ball, American Beauty started it.
okay. No.
American Beauty, if you've seen that, was about a day. It's just about a single day, and he says, "What's the opening lines? It's nice to be. It's nice to wake up and not know how the day is going to go, because then it's exciting."
Yeah.
And he says, "There's only one day that you don't know how it's going to go, and that's the day of your own death."
Yeah.
Now it's a great opener. Alan Ball is absolutely great. American Beauty, and there's this guy that's come into the knowledge of that, and he keeps on going around with his camera exploring different things, and how incredibly beautiful things are.
Yeah.
And the sign of beauty is Taurus. It's represented by Libra. And when you have awareness of death, everything becomes extraordinarily beautiful, especially those people. I mean, those people that jumped off the Golden Gate Bridge to get rid of their life, I think there's something like 60% of them survived.
Mm-hmm.
And in interviews after them having committed suicide, they all changed. They all changed their understanding of life. They had to go through an initiation.
Yes.
And halfway down, they changed their mind.
Yeah. You see this a lot.
Right. So, but that's an extreme form of shamanic initiation to have to go through it. But they all changed, and then they all saw life differently. The transformation was absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah, you see this in all of the pagan shamanistic traditions. When they go through the process of initiation, a part of that is to mimic the death of the old self, so that they arise as a new person or as a new being, with a new understanding of life, and also all of the gifts that human beings truly possess. And I think sometimes, that whole idea, and it's interesting that you brought up the Golden Gate survivors, because there's a song it's about this guy, and he basically says, this is how I woke up, I just wanted to die. And by the time the song finishes, you can hear him saying, like, I actually, I don't want to die. Like, now that I realise that I'm on my way out and I've just done this, it's very, very true. I think you see this a lot with people at the end of life. When they've got like a terminal disease, they become, I've seen some people, one lady who I actually used to give Reiki to, become a shining being. Her body was obviously pain, and it was very hard and very sad to see, but inside, like the gleam in her eyes, it was just like, she was like, what, this doesn't define any of it. And she just looked on an internal level more radiant the closer she got. And that really, really stuck with me, and probably always will, actually. It was just,
yes. I'd just like to finish off the last point about experiencing powerlessness, which is one of the great themes of Pluto transits. Isn't that the point, that the ego can't control it?
Yeah.
Not at the very end. I mean, you can always go to dignitas for a dignified end rather than a calamitous one. That's another debate, whether that's moral, immoral. But there is something at the point where you can't control what happens, and the experience of letting go of ego control is an initiation experience. Like we were talking about sex, a lot of people don't have satisfying sex because they can't really give themselves to the experience. They're worried about it, because then they're merged with somebody else, and am I going to cut, it gets spread out in all kinds of things. I think the swapping of money, for example, as an attempt to, Taurus, Scorpio thing, as, people accumulate wealth or power or industry and money in order to ameliorate, apparently ward off death as soon, as quick as they can. That doesn't work. That doesn't work. What was the second question? I lost my way about powerlessness. That's the point. What was your next bit? I had something to say about that.
I think that was it. What I was trying to highlight is, you know, as a young person, I thought about it a lot. And one of the things that really freaked me out more than anything was this idea that I didn't know how it was going to happen. And when I got out of my head about that, and had certain experiences of life in general, it really kind of changed. And I think you're right. I think you do go through the process as you age of understanding, yes, okay, this is going to happen, so I need to live life at a level that makes it worth it.
Yeah. Yes, I'm sorry. I'm sure we'll pick it up again. I said I'd just like to go back, and then the other thought process disappeared. But you were talking about the gleam of life, and that happens. Ramdas aka Richard Alpert, quite a leading figure, not a guru figure, but a teacher, a kind of pundit in these matters. Excellent. He set up a whole thing for a little while about seeing people through the phases of death and how they encounter it, how they experience it. You know, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross used to do. She encountered people of fatal diseases, and you know there are 5 stages of dying: mourning and loss. We shouldn't underestimate the human, the encounter with human suffering in it. I don't think a mere idea of something beyond, if you like, is going to ameliorate mourning and grief, especially for those people left behind, because they experience things. Emotional loss and so on, but that's not the end of the story. That's the point. It's not that there's and all they say in the Buddhist tradition that the last teacher in this incarnation is death.
Yeah, I saw it. I remember watching a documentary about something, and I think it was near-death experiences, and this guy said he said, you know, on my headstone, I want written, "Gone to learn the final secret." And I just thought, wow, yeah, you know, it really is that. You know, you talk about it being a teacher and this idea of Scorpio and secrecy and stuff, like "gone to learn the final secret" just absolutely hit it on the head for me, because I thought, well, yeah, that's very Plutonian, Scorpionic. It has that element because, you know, the whole thing about secrecy and stuff. I mean, and to take it back, I think you're right. All of the things that we experienced when I lost a nan this year.
All right.
Watching that was very difficult, and seeing the people that have been left behind, you know, my family, my dad especially, was really, really distraught, and that was really hard. But my understanding that there is something else, I can't define it for everybody. I'll never be able to make everybody believe what I know, but I know it. And so while it wasn't an easy experience to have, and it's, you know, there's still moments now where, you know, I'll remember something, or I'll find a recipe and I'll be like, oh, you know, that reminds me of Nan. Those things are very real. And I think you're right. You do go through the stages of it. But what is eternal?
One of them is anger. That's it, at the loss of her daughter, Demeter. Persephone is her daughter, and the daughter is abducted by Pluto or Hades. Comes up from the underworld, and he ever since they fought the battle of the Titans, the new lot, Zeus and his brother Pluto and Hades. Hades was given the mask of invisibility and total control and total rule over death. So although he wasn't as powerful as Zeus, his law was irrevocable. You know, and that was stated in the kind of the Greek idea of death. Interesting.
Yes.
So there's an irrevocability. The disinclination to experience loss, mourning, grief can produce an enormous rage. But this is the rage of life or the ego against the powers of forces which are larger than us, or necessity. And now, however you reconcile that difference, however you reconcile the balancing number between Thanatos and Eros, or Ananke and the sun, or Horus, the god of the horizon, versus Set, which is where the sun sets. We're back again about to life and death. Both were given value. They became devalued as blackness and darkness and all that in mythology. But it is the reconciliation of it, I think, in your own mind and in your own being. I wouldn't say that loss of relationship, loss of emotional attachment is ever going to be that acceptable, right? It's not acceptable to experience those things, because human life in many ways is a series of attachments and losses. We come in, we attach ourselves, and then inevitably we're going to have to lose. Now, the thing is how we deal with that. Yeah. And Kubler-Ross has a wonderful series. First of all, we deny it, that it's ever going to happen. Won't happen to me. It certainly won't happen tomorrow. See? And then there is an inevitability of facing something. I can't remember the actual stages, but they all mix into one eventually, is that we bargain with life, you know. If you're suffering from something, you go, well, look, if I come out of this, I promise I'll be different, you see. I promise I'll change and I'll do this. And sometimes that bargaining is like bargaining with death. There's an old rule, actually. There's an old law to do with dreaming, which comes to mind, is that sometimes if you experience death coming through your door in your bedroom, and he goes to the head of the bed, then you can bargain with him.
But if he comes to the foot of your bed?
But if he comes to the foot of the bed, he is saying to you, you're going to go be 6 feet under. That's why we say it's feet first. And 6 feet under is the name of that series, by the way, that I've just remembered from America, which is one of the greatest series to come out. Alan Ball initiated it. And it's all about death. The father who is the head of a funeral service, dies on the first episode.
Oh, wow. Okay.
It completely shakes up the entire family dynamic, of which we are also fated to experience.
Yes.
Because we live within that. That's very much our fate. How we deal with it is what we talked about yesterday. How we deal with the archetypal dynamics. We have an element of choice, but we can't choose all of that. And the whole series is about how the family, death brings up the whole family dynamics, the problems, the difficulties, the identity problems. And we've got one as a teenager, one as a long lost son, one was a gay guy who hadn't come out. We got the mother who believes that, you know, her entire role in life was as a mother. She's got to let go of that. And every episode then starts with a death. Right? And it's like bang, 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 bang. And we're taken into the mortuary and what happens and you know, or the death services, funeral services. But it's a real telling of how death affects people, how they experience it, and its great transformative power to live when we've got life, to really live, because eventually it's going to end. So anyway, that's what that brings up in me, and we come back to life cycles, necessity, and the meaning of it as it comes into our life. So after the bargaining phase, usually comes anger. There's nothing we can do about it. We have a temper tantrum. Right? Then we may go into, at any stage, a depression. And depression in this level of life is the mourning of our regrets. Because we always regret the mourning of loss, the mourning of the fact. But after that, what Kubler-Ross found out with patients, and she did this, 30 years of work with patients, she found these stages, they all work together in a way, and sometimes in a different sequence, was that eventually an acceptance that this must happen. This must happen. the necessity of life has taken a course in this life, and it must happen. I have an argument with that word acceptance, because I think some things, losses, are totally unacceptable, especially when they're newborn babies or they suffer leukemia at the age of 3. I've seen people in therapy whose mothers come into therapy and their children have that. It's very difficult. You can't simply placate them with some ideas about death. It has to go through these stages. But the last stage, I would rather change from acceptance into accommodation. There's an accommodation that you can make with the inevitability of life. And life is thanatos and eros, birth and beauty and going all the experiences, and the inevitability of letting that go.
Yeah. I think, you know, it's really amazing that you started that whole talk with the irrevocability of Hades, right? Of his
absolutely, he's a god.
Death. Absolutely. And then on the opposite end of it, with that final stage of you know what happens, of, like you said, not acceptance but accommodating things, which really, I mean, if you look at the death card. Mm-hmm. So you have the king there. He's basically done. He's on the floor. He's out for the count.
So there's the sun.
His crown is on the floor.
That's interesting.
In the death card, the king actually represents the ego, right? The ego can't survive this concept of death is going to get me. Then you have the Pope, the priest, who's still standing, who tries to make sense of it through his belief system, you know, and in that way. But in that respect, still fighting against this idea of total acceptance of what is, right? Of what is inevitable. Then you have the maiden, who is actually the same woman that's on the strength card. And she's kneeling before death, you know, to say like, okay, well, I'll come to it and I'll kind of do that. But she would be the one that is pleading, so to speak, because she's got her head slightly turned away. So again, really
bargaining.
Yeah, bargaining that you mentioned, which I thought was fantastic. And then the final one that you see is a small child holding some flowers with arms open. And this is the soul, right? Interestingly enough, in the Greek language, as you yourself know, in my family, if they say my child, they say psychimo, my soul, right? That's what they would call their child. So I find that really interesting. And I've always believed that your soul is like a child. It's the purest essence of who you are. It's completely accepting of what is considered natural law, and it allows for everything. So interesting then that it's the only one that kind of just, I got some flowers, give me a hug. I know what you're here for, but you know, that's the pure essence of self, ego obliterated, accepting of death on a horse, come to claim.
There's such a lot in that card. First of all, he's on a horse, but he's on a horse, which the horse often represents the libido, the instinctual forces of life, and he's on top of it, and he has a caput mortuum, the skull, which often represents death. But what I liked is I didn't realize that the crown was on the floor, and the crown is a representation of individual sovereignty. And this links, interestingly enough, into the political situation at the moment. Sovereignty being that we are sovereign. We have an independent, sun-like experience of ourselves, and that has to be given up. So the crown's fallen. There isn't any sovereignty. There is, you know, it represents a death of some kind. The innocent, unless we become like children, we don't enter the kingdom of heaven. This is a very old Christian teaching, and yet it's something to do with the acceptance of experience itself, as opposed to reflected experience of the adult.
Yes.
The other thing about, I think belief systems are constructs. Of course they're constructs, because how can they not be? They should be seen comparatively. You know, because every culture in the world has their death constructs, their funeral rites, whether that's burning or embalming or burying or one way or another, you know. and or given us out to the vultures on the highest mountain that we can climb. There's all kind of different symbolic areas, but these are all attempts to not placate some placate the ego. Oh, okay, when we pass over, we're going to move into this territory, but some are an attempt to bridge the gap between belief and experience. And that some belief systems can help people to overcome their fears. They're not to be taken. They're not to be taken away from people. Whereas a kind of more pure kind of experience is a kind of soul acceptance, I suppose.
Yeah,
and relates back to initiation, back to shamanism, which is about accepting the process of death, not on an emotional level. I mentioned about accommodating.
No, for sure.
But true acceptance would be to say, oh, this is just part of the life cycle in me. We're in October, we're in the decaying period. Bring it on, not with the joy, but nevertheless that it goes along with the horse. Death is on the horse. Death is on the libido. Yes. And maybe that's a suggestion that death can ride the horse. I mean, the horse is very much characteristic of Sagittarius, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's half man, half beast. I know, but something to do with the carrying the libido. That even in death, maybe there is a life. That it's a profound symbol that on the horse. Others represent death as a scythe, the Grim Reaper, that kind of thing. And as in there's a series, Terry Pratchett. I love some of that. It's too complicated for me to go. But Terry Pratchett, one of them, I think it's the first or second books. He goes through life and death decides to have a break. Right, I'm not doing it anymore.
Yeah, I've had enough.
I've had enough. So you go along with this. Now, death hands in his notice. Death dies.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a comical, but it's a deeply imaginal. What happens with that?
Yeah.
You see, no cycles. And so the death of Demeter, you see, where Demeter's daughter is taken into the underworld, that is the birth of the seasons, the 4 seasons, and we're back to 4 and 13.
Yeah.
13 being the other thing after the completion. 12 is a completion. 12 signs of the Zodiac, or 12, 12, all of that. 13 is what happens after that complete cycle.
Yeah.
So they do measure up in that way, and I just think even talking about it evokes it, but it will. Belief systems would. Some are placatory responses of the psyche to try and understand death.
Yeah.
Fair enough. Existential reality, existential therapists say it's one of their big 5. In order to experience life fully, the beauty of it, the pleasure of it, the interest in it, and to fulfill your own purpose, you have to accept the inevitability of death.
Yeah.
It's one of their big 5. Not just not just religious. Some of them tend to go further and say all religion is also a kind of attempt to create a belief system which you don't have to experience
in order to control
the fear of it. Now, there's an argument to be made in that, but actually I don't think that's the end of it. I mean, shamanism has a lot more to say than existentialism, but this is all open territory when a card of death turns up in your reading.
Yeah. Sometimes it represents
the Pluto transits. The Pluto transits for astrologers. Some people get very frightened of this archetypal experience that they're going to experience. But we must say it doesn't have to be death as a physical thing. It could mean the death of some level of life in you, some attitude, some old attitude, which has lived its course. It's at the end of its time, and it has to go.
Yeah. No, very much. I totally agree with
David Cameron. I just made a note. David Cameron, right, has his sun at 15 Libra.
Mm-hmm.
His sun is at 15 Libra. In 2016, Pluto was exactly square it.
Oh, wow. Okay.
This is a lot to do with Brexit, see?
Yeah.
And he had to resign. Nick Clegg's the same. 16 Capricorn. Pluto was exactly conjunction his sun. That was the end of his political career. Right? Margaret Thatcher. When Pluto came to her sun, that was the beginning of her political career. She came into power when Pluto conjoined her sun.
So she was kind of marked from the beginning, really.
Right. Well, Pluto hit her Mars. She took control of the Conservative Party, had a battle on her hands. Pluto hits the sun by transit. She becomes the leader of the Conservative Party, goes through a war not long afterwards, 1983, 1982, right? And after the war, she was victorious. And she became rule Britannia, you know, and all that. And Pluto was in Scorpio at that time. She decimated a lot of the old forms ruthlessly. Then eventually it moved into Scorpio. It conjoined her ascendant and her Saturn, and that's when she was stabbed in the back. That's when she was betrayed. That's when she lost her power. She went through a death. It's very interesting, Pluto transits, when they come, that you have to experience it in some way.
Yeah, I have to say, I'm kind of dreading mine. I've been keeping an eye on the conjunction that's coming up because it's.
So you're part. Oh, so all of this theoretical attempt at a balanced view of death, it doesn't stop those fears, does it? You're dreading it.
No,
I went through mine 2011. 2012. Pluto opposed Sun.
But I mean, even that, I think, is something that I've looked at and kind of just accepted that, you know, what it's going to be, what it's going to be. But the human mind, and especially if you've got an imaginative mind, you tend to. So, and it really is. It actually reminds me of a few tarot cards, because sometimes what your mind produces compared to what the actual event is like your mind makes it this awful thing, and then when it happens you're like, oh, okay, well, it's not great and it does suck, but actually I can deal with that, that's fine. But what we do to ourselves in the mind of it all, really interesting. I've got a whole bunch of death cards here in front.
Yeah, please.
I pulled them up from all the decks. I'd really like to.
No, I must say that the death card is surely linked to various others, like the Hangman, for example, is the voluntary submission of ourselves to a different point of view, probably the opposite point of view, and it's like Prometheus forced on a rock, you know, and all that. We must sometimes be chained up, you know. So it's all working towards death. You know, the tower is the destruction of an old form of thinking, and that can appear as, I mean, it's the death of the form at the top of the structure, somebody falling off of his elevated power, of his elevation. You know, his ego is right at the top of I'm in control, and then this lightning bolt cracks it open. That's a very Uranian kind of death. You know, so but this is a more pure initiate. I think the death card is a more an attempt by life to transform your very Weltanschauung, your very, that was a German word that Freud used, meaning your point of view about life, not just about particular bits, but about the whole of life. A chance for you to open up to a spiritual developmental growth where it means something. It's not just a change of belief systems.
Yeah, no, for sure.
A real conversion of one way of being in life to another way of being. Okay, I just wanted to make that.
No, and it's true, and it really is. There is a crossover point, and I mean, I've seen in many readings I've had a death card come up, and people are like, oh, you know, is it somebody that I know? And it's sometimes, you know, there's been moments where I've wanted to say to somebody, well, actually, it's worse than that. You know, it's not the death of a person, it's a death of something that you really hold very dear that has served its purpose and now needs to perish. You know, that's when it gets really kind of not difficult, but that's when it gets quite tender, because, oh, right, okay, well, you know, nobody's going to die, so that means everything's okay. Well, actually, the fact that your job that you've been in for the last 20 years is about to come to an end and come crashing down in a really huge way,
Yeah.
do you know what I mean? So it's
Yes, I
still
do.
death, and I think this is the reason it's important to open up these dialogues. I mean, some interesting ones. This one, not necessarily one of my favorite ones. It's got
Could you hold it closer?
it's got
Hold it closer,
oh,
right up to the camera. Ah, right. So is that the unicorn, or is that just a?
no, it's just the white horse, but on a shield.
Okay, it looks more like Hell's Angels
Yeah,
to me than anything else. But I like the horse underneath. Very similar to the weight deck. You know, the horse is underneath.
absolutely.
So we have Thanatos at the top, and of course Eros, the life force underneath. Could you hold that one closer?
This one.
This is the angel of death, isn't it?
Yeah, cradling the baby again. That whole idea of new life. When one thing ends, another
But
thing.
are those eyes or those peacock feathers?
No, their eyes.
Well, that's very similar to peacock feathers as well.
Yeah.
The great panoply of life which we look at. Yes.
Absolutely. Then we've got obviously the Rider-Waite one, which everybody knows to some point. This one's quite an interesting one. Death there as a pregnant, you said this whole idea of putting death on the feminine energies, so to speak. So that one's really interesting that it's...
Well, that's interesting that it's pregnant with possibility. She has the side there, so it's a bit of a not confused image. There's an amalgamation of that. That when a mother becomes a mother, she can no longer be a daughter.
Oh wow,
that's the initiation on the feminine path. And we don't have to have a physical birth, although I think that's very special to women, and it's a particular kind of initiation. Our children can be children of the mind, children of the spirit, children of the heart. They don't have to be physical children, and are equally as valid. But we all have children. We all have a fifth house. So so it might represent that pregnancy and eventual delivery is an initiation. It's an initiation to a new life. So I like that symbolism. It's quite feminine. But then she also has the scythe, which is the Saturn side of things, that after this, things will not be the same.
Yeah.
The corn is going to be cut down, which again is harvesting. It's seasonal. It's to do with Demeter, and it's to do with the loss of Persephone, the daughter, and very much linked in with that card.
Yeah.
I don't know why I am so drawn to the weight image, but I do like these other ones.
Yeah, no, it's really nice to see that they have like common themes.
But they draw out different aspects of it. Pregnancy, the birth of an individual, the birth of something means that something it's the end of a cycle. Do you see? Again, that 9-month moonly cycle, the 9-month pregnancy, and then it comes out and thinks things are changed. And I'm sure that women who have been through the birth of their child, that is a very, very special, a very, very unique experience.
Yeah.
And some of them have psychosis afterwards, and I'm grateful I'm not a woman.
Yeah, me too.
And I don't say that with any problem. I just say that the archetypal feminine is the experience of the embodiment of the spirit. It's not only that, because we also have the figure of Sophia, which is the wisdom to come through this facet of birth and cycles and seasons and so on. So that feminine element of spirituality is, but it includes Earth. It's not just the sky gods of understanding and rationality and metaphysics. No, it's the actual experience of embodied life. Yeah. So I like that with that card, the imagery.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Richard, as always, I could
run out of time.
Talk to you about these things forever, and I'm sure there is way more. I would like to ask you as well, so next month, if we can go on to the Temperance card, as it will be Sagittarius season.
Ah, yes, temperance, right.
right? Which is great. So next, yeah, because we come into Sagittarius season at the end of sort of November.
Mm, mm,
Uh, so it would be great for us to, we've started this at the pagan New Year, so to speak,
mm.
for the 31st of October.
Yeah,
And, this whole eighth house thing that we've got going on at the moment, the sun in
yeah.
Scorpio. And it would be really nice to continue this throughout the whole major arcana. So next time we can look at Sagittarius and Temperance and, see where we go from there and how it develops.
Well, I think to sum up, particularly in tarot readings and Pluto transits we've been talking about, the archetype is the same.
Yeah.
The archetype is the beginning of one thing and the end of another.
Yes.
And such processes are necessary.
Mm-hmm.
How we encounter them is a whole psychological process. The fact that we have to encounter them is irrevocable. And it will and we can go two ways. We can defend, deny, get angry, try to bargain with it, or eventually you begin to accept it in some way. But that acceptance inevitably initiates a new kind of knowledge.
Mm.
Not just knowledge at the head level, a knowledge of being. Martin Heidegger said that it's only death that wakes us up from a mindfulness of, a kind of set way of doing things, automaticity, to an aliveness and awakeness. And I think that underlies the symbolism.
Absolutely.
Excuse me. He says coffee.
The idea, it was important to do this. And, I'm really, really grateful that you agreed to. And thank you so much for all of the knowledge that you've brought and all of the examples and the information. I think what I was...
it's certainly the end, because my
was really let people know that, yes, death is a natural accompaniment to life. If you have life, then at some point you are going to experience the end of that. The death card bad rap when it comes to tarot. Scorpio as a sign gets a bad rap as well, with a lot of the modern stuff that's come through. And I think what was really important was that we open up a dialogue about a subject that is considered taboo, but do it sensitively. I mean, Venus is in Scorpio at the moment, so perfect time really to smooth some of the edges off, so to speak. But I really feel like it was important. I'm really looking forward to the rest of the Zodiac with you. And again, thank you so much for everything that you brought to the talk. I really, really appreciate it.
Pleasure.